All right, we're live. Johnny, thanks for joining me this morning on my podcast. You're calling in from Manchester, UK, is that correct?
It is correct, yeah. The great city of Manchester in England, yeah.
Okay, I've been to the UK once, only London. I was 18, so that was about a decade ago, but definitely enjoyed my time there. Have you lived in Manchester your whole life, or is it a recent
Yeah, no,
place?
Manchester is yeah, no, Manchester is I suppose my home. I suppose I technically live just outside the city, so I live in a county called Derbyshire, which I know the Americans go wild a little bit for sort of Pride and Prejudice, and it's the county where that was filmed and recorded. So it's also the green rolling hills and old country manors and all those sorts of things. And I live right at the top end of the county in a town called Glossop, which is I can get to the border of Manchester if I walked about 2 minutes from the end of my drive. I'm that kind of close
Okay.
to the border, but I still consider myself like a Manc or a Mancunian. I sort of still hang on to the coattails of that. And I've always worked in the city, as in my roles, I've always worked, and seen Manchester as very much my a place where I work and play and visit, and I absolutely love the city. And it's going through a renaissance at the moment. Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
If you may or may not be aware of it, but Manchester is literally
No.
on the up. We currently have, I think it's three-quarters of the Europe's highest cranes in the city, just building high-rise buildings. Um,
And
so
and are you in favor of that, or is it changing it in a way you wouldn't prefer?
no, I am. I am. I mean, as both a sort of resident and a firefighter, I think it's kind of cool. There's even like we even call ourselves sort of Manhattan Chester at the moment. It's sort of very much
Okay.
heading the way of sort of New York and Manhattan, and it's bringing with it a lot of excitement. A lot of people. The population of Manchester has sort of grown exponentially over the last few years. It used to be sort of very much old cotton mills and terraced houses
Mm-hmm.
and kind of smokestacks, and it's changed to these sort of glass sky rises, high rise skyscrapers and kind of cool trendy bars and all this sort of stuff. So no, I'm kind of down with it. I think it's kind of cool.
Very nice. Yeah, and so this kind of leads into my next question because I'm curious. So I'm assuming is it being caused because London is so crowded and overdeveloped, and that's kind of the next logical place to develop in the UK? Is that what you would say is causing it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's not my area of expertise, so I'm going to be sort of purely sort of kind of objective here. But yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. I think London. If you've been there, it's one of the great world cities, and it's a great place. But it is expensive. It's crowded. It's packed. And I think Manchester is sort of taking on the kind of the mantle of the UK's sort of second city, and it always was. But I think it's really starting to kind of own that now, and there's been a lot of
Okay.
development come in. A lot of people head up there. The universities, the science sectors, all these things have sort of seen Manchester now as kind of the place to be, and that with it brings people and jobs and businesses and everything that comes with it.
Hmm.
And it's sort of kind of spiraling at the moment. It's kind of like leading on. Someone builds a big building, so it brings in jobs, which brings in more buildings, which brings in more jobs, and it kind of becomes self perpetuating, I guess. But yeah, it's very
And
cool.
I would assume that with all that development, it would cause an increase in real estate prices. Would that be
Mm.
fair to say? And I'm kind of curious if you what your living situation is in Manchester. Do you own a house or rent a flat? I believe you guys would call it, or apartment. I'm just kind of curious, as because from my American perspective, I just know that London is expensive, so I'm assuming in general in the UK, real estate is expensive. I don't know if you could speak to that a bit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, London is very expensive. London is outrageously expensive, and I think that's one of the reasons people have shifted to Manchester because it's much
Hmm.
more affordable. I mean, Manchester is, you're right, absolutely. Rental prices, house prices are going up. They are still absolutely nowhere like London. Absolutely nothing like. But yes, I mean, if you even compare the prices of buying a house compared to renting, a home or a flat. So even sort of 10 years ago in Manchester, that's gone
Hmm.
through the roof, and with it, I live just outside the city, so I kind of live in the suburbs, outside. I own my own home,
Okay.
and we got like a, I don't know, like a family home, kind of 4 bedroom
Hmm.
house, outside the city in Glossop. I bought years ago, so I'm kind of riding that wave, I suppose, now, because I don't know how it is with you guys in the States, but we have this thing like the
Oh
property
yeah.
ladder. If it works a similar way in the States, where you kind of got to get on it to keep up with it, and I was fortunate enough to be able to do that sort of like 15 years ago, so I'm kind of on it
Okay.
now.
So do you mind sharing what you bought for and what your home is worth now? I would just be curious to see the appreciation.
Sure. Yeah, so we bought our house for about £200,000.
Okay. Pounds.
Um,
Okay.
I, yeah, it's probably worth two and a half times that now, I think, roughly.
Okay. Yeah. So
Um,
I think maybe the U.S. has even appreciated more. I don't know. Just in the
Potentially,
U.S.
yeah.
with COVID, I thought that the housing market might crash, but it did the exact
Mm,
opposite, and it's still,
same here.
hanging in there. So it's
Yeah.
interesting. And then I'm just curious too. So just a couple more questions. Do you pay property taxes in the UK?
Yeah, when you
You,
buy, you pay, we call it stamp duty, and it's kind of part
okay.
of, part of that. And then, I suppose ongoing, yeah, you have your kind of your council taxes and things like that you pay, I suppose, for local services. Um, I don't pay. I don't know whether it's the same in the States, like ground rent or anything. I kind of own the house and the
Mm,
land. I know some places maybe
okay.
they don't own the land; they have to pay tax or rent, I suppose, to have the house on the land, and that's not how we do it here. But
Huh. I've not heard of that in the US. I know,
okay,
like, if you live in a mobile home park, perhaps you
mm,
you own the home, but then you pay rent for the land. But the way it
yeah,
works too, and I own a home in the US, is, yeah, it's just property taxes that go to the county, and you just pay them, I believe, on a quarterly basis. But yeah, in perpetuity you're paying property taxes. So interesting
yeah,
to learn about a little bit what it's like to buy a home in the UK. But yeah, maybe we could pivot a bit too. I know you mentioned that you are a firefighter, so
mm.
maybe you could speak to how you decided, if you want to go way back. I'm not sure. Did you always know you wanted to be a firefighter? Did you have a family member that was a firefighter? What influenced you to choose that career? Because I'm always interested to learn that reasoning. I feel like I've kind of fallen into my career. Oftentimes people just fall into their career and run with it, but
Mm.
I don't know if that's the case for you.
I think in a way it kind of is. I remember going back to sort of, I went to school and then college and then to university, so I kind of went that route. Um, but then I left university with a kind of a bachelor's degree in a nutshell, psychology. But I mean, there's a bit of a
Hmm.
story behind that as well. But I kind of didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. And what I did know is that I wanted to do something in public service. So whether
Okay.
it be the military or the army, whether it be the police or the fire.
Hmm.
Um, I knew I was never meant. I don't know. I didn't feel like I was meant for sort of a job in business or a job in um,
Hmm.
I don't know, kind of the corporate world or whatever that might be. I was pretty convinced that just didn't fit with me. I didn't sit well with me. I needed it, never did, and so I was always pretty convinced it was going to be some sort of service. And I did a little bit of time in. Do you have it in the States? Like, I think they're called like your reserve army, where your territorial army, we call
Yeah.
them here in the UK. Like
Hmm.
you kind of your part time soldiers, if that makes like sense. I don't mean to sound like disparaging, that they do a great job and all that, but
Yeah.
you understand what I mean. I did a bit
Hmm.
of time with them, and that made me realize pretty quickly that I didn't really want to be a soldier.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
the thought of spending my life, sleeping in tents and walking really long distances with backpacks. Just no, that turned me right off.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I had a look around, and I had a look at the police, and then I visited a couple of fire stations. Phoned them up and said, hey, can I come see you and visit you? And have a look at what you do. And I remember going to my first one. I was actually in Sheffield at the time. I was at university in Sheffield. Um, I suppose that's the only time I never lived in. I didn't live in Manchester, but Sheffield is sort of only just over the hill from Manchester.
Okay.
And I visited a couple of the stations there, and I just fell in love with it. I fell in love with the fire stations themselves, the feel, the people on
Hmm.
those stations, the jobs they were going to, the kind of role, the sort of the meaning behind it, the purpose of being a firefighter. It just sort of I visited a couple of stations, and every time I visited, there was just something about it that just thought this is for me. This is where I belong. Um, it just felt right. It just felt like something in my gut just sort of took hold and went,
Hmm.
this is for me. And um, yeah, I did apply for Sheffield, but didn't get in. And
Hmm.
then Manchester recruited, and I applied there, and was fortunate enough to get in, which I'm glad I did, because Manchester is, it's a cool place to be a firefighter. It's good fun.
Okay. And so, is it relatively difficult to become a firefighter in the UK? Is there a lot of competition, or is there any
Yeah,
specific qualification, or were you just fortunate that they had an open position, you interviewed well, and you were able to get the job?
I no, I hate sort of sounding like I'm sort of trying to sell myself, but there's a load of
Hmm.
competition. It's really difficult. I think, on average, I spoke to people in recruitment, since, and they say, yeah, we get something like 500 applicants for one job, and so
Hmm.
it's pretty competitive and pretty tough. You don't necessarily need any formal qualifications. In fact, you don't actually have to have anything. But I suppose, like any application, the more you can kind of, I suppose, bring to the party, if you like, then
Hmm.
maybe the more chance you have of getting in. But I feel that, I suppose, if I try and sell myself a little bit here, like I feel like I have certain qualities that they look for. I was physically fit. I was capable. I'd done roles in the past, before that, in things like the territorial army and things that meant that I like working as a team. I enjoyed being a team player. I was motivated by helping others. All these sorts of things that I had emotional intelligence, which you really need as a firefighter. All this sort of stuff that I
Hmm.
think is really important. So I think I think if I without trying to sound too kind of up myself, I suppose. Like, I think
Yeah.
I interviewed well, and went through the process well. But making it clear, I think I applied 3 times and failed 3 times before I finally got in. So I guess part of it luck, part of it determination, part of it not giving up, part of it hopefully being a good candidate.
Okay. No, I think that's interesting. So I think that's good advice for, who knows if someone watches this and they're young in the UK and they want to be a
Mm,
firefighter. It sounds like
absolutely.
persistence is key. I don't know if it's changed since you started to now. Are there different qualifications? Would you say it's even more competitive now? Or what's your sense of the market now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's something about being a firefighter that will always attract people
Hmm.
to it. I think one thing we've had a problem with in the UK for a while is that, whether you know much about sort of UK politics, and we're going into a different, potentially here, here we've had a sort
Hmm.
of a kind of conservative government for a while. I suppose a Republican sort of government is the
Hmm.
similar sort of thing for you, and um, they've sort of hit us with a kind of what we call austerity agenda. So there's a lot of funding not coming to the public services for a number of
Hmm.
years, and where that's left us is with, for a while we were quite low paid,
Hmm.
comparatively, and the pay didn't keep up with kind of prices and stuff like that. That meant that a lot of people left, so we saw like quite
Hmm.
a bit of exodus from the service, just because of salary, really. I know I had a number of friends who left. But that said, we've never struggled to recruit, and recruit some really good people and some really good candidates, and some really good sort of new firefighters. I think our problem for a long while was sort of keeping them, but we've just had a sort of reasonably significant sort of pay deal recently, which I'm hoping will sort of bring us back to where we were, or certainly to make the job the job's always been attractive. I think people will always want to be firefighters, but I think sort of keeping people is the key, and I think that hopefully
Yeah.
will sort of start to look a bit better than it did. Yeah.
So maybe we could pause there a bit because I'm
Mm.
curious about the pay, and maybe
Mm.
you could speak to the entirety of your career when you started, and then it sounds like you went through a period of lower pay due to policy
Mm.
decisions, and then maybe where it is now. And then I'm also curious. I know, or I believe in the U.S., right? If you're a firefighter, you also have retirement benefits, meaning
Mm.
a pension. When you retire, you receive a portion of your pay for the remainder of your life. So I don't know if there's similar benefits in the UK, but if you could just speak to that, I'd be curious to learn
Yeah,
a bit
absolutely,
more.
and there is, and that's absolutely one of the bonuses of the job. That there is absolutely the kind of the wraparound stuff that comes with it. So when I joined, the pay was, I think it was 28,000 a year for a firefighter.
Okay.
That kind of that's pounds, so £28,000.
And sorry, really quick, was that was 15 years ago? You said, or what year,
16,
if you remember?
two
16.
thousand
Okay,
seven. Yeah,
2007. Okay.
yeah. Bear in mind, you have to do your first 2 years on your sort of probationary wage, which is less.
Okay.
But a qualified firefighter sort of it was 28,000, and over the last 16 years that went up to about 30 over about 14 years. So over sort of 14 years, it sort of only went up by £2,000 a year. So it didn't increase a lot over
So,
that time.
and yeah, sorry to interject. So it sounds like,
No,
is
sorry.
that the probationary rate for the just first 2 years went up to 30, but once you got to your third year, was there a bump in pay, or were you making
No,
that
no,
30?
30,000 was a fully fledged competent
Oh, okay.
firefighter. Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
if I could just comment a bit, and I don't, maybe I'll need to interview a firefighter from the U.S. next just to kind of get a different perspective. But and I understand, right, the pound to dollar exchange rate. The pound
Mm,
is stronger, so back in the day, even it was 1.6 to 1. So
mm,
if you think about that in the U.S. dollar terms, maybe it's $50,000, $45,000. I will say it's lower than I expected. So I
mm.
don't know if you have any insight into what firefighters in the U.S. make, but I don't know. I just have
I
a
don't.
sense it's a bit more. But regardless, it sounds like you've stuck with the position, so you feel that, like you said earlier, you really have a passion for it, and maybe that outweighs the pay. Or does the pay afford you a pretty good lifestyle? It sounds like you've already bought a home. I would assume you're able to afford things for your family and such in Manchester. But what's your perspective on the pay?
Yeah. So the pay was getting quite painful, really. Like I think it
Mm-hmm.
was manageable, kind of what would it be, 2007? So sort of 14 years ago, maybe. Like it wasn't too bad, but obviously as inflation kicks in, but salaries don't rise, that becomes harder and
Mm-hmm.
harder. I think I can't speak for everybody. Obviously, on a personal perspective, I'm married, I have a wife, and she works for the NHS, so the health the
Okay.
health system in the UK. So we had that salary too. I was fortunate to get some support from my parents to be able to buy my first house, which is a little terrace, like a small terrace, and that kind of got me kind of started. I think without
Mm-hmm.
that, yeah, it would have been tough. We'd have coped, but like would have been tough. But yeah, it's not a brilliant salary. I know firefighters around the world get paid more than that, and I'm sure there's them that get paid less too. So I don't want to forget
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
either. Yes, there is a pension, although that's changed. It used to be a 30-year career with quite reasonable benefits, and now it's a 40-year career with less benefits, costing more money. So that sort of the pension is still good, very good, but it's not as attractive as it used to be.
Do,
Um,
do you know off the top of your head what it is? Is it a percentage of your salary? And I'm a, I'm assuming what else is included, right? Because healthcare. is socialized in
Mm.
the UK. So you get
Mm.
healthcare your whole life. So is it just a
Mm.
portion of your salary, or do you not know that
Yeah, so
level of
it's
detail?
it's a portion. So I think we pay like 14% or something like that of our salary. So I pay something each month. A couple £100 each
Mm.
month into salary. Yeah, healthcare is socialised. We do pay each month. Part of our taxes is to sort of pay into the healthcare system. So you know. It's kind of people sometimes think it's free. It's not free, everybody
Yeah.
pays for it, but
Yeah.
it's covered, and that's good. It's a good thing. I think it's a good
I'm,
thing anyway.
yeah. So I'm actually curious because I actually work in the healthcare
Mm.
sector in the US, which you probably think is crazy, or whatever
A
your
little bit,
perception
but
of is
who am
it
I to
from the
judge?
UK. Yeah. Yeah. So is it a personal tax that you pay to fund
Yeah.
your healthcare every month? And then do you know, I would assume that employers or maybe the firefighting department also pays a tax as well. So is that the way it works, or how is it funded? Solely
No, so
personally, or
yeah, so we all pay personally, but we all pay the same. So I suppose this is where it's kind of more socialized. So everybody pays the same each month, regardless of how much you need it. So, if
okay?
you're really fit and healthy, not using, the health system, you're paying for something I suppose you're not using. But the theory is that at some point you may need it, and if we all chip in, that
Mm-hmm.
as and when you do need it, or your family members do, that it's there and it's paid for. A lot of it also comes out of general taxation, so government taxes on fuel and food, and property and all those sorts of things. Goes into it too. So,
If you don't mind sharing, how much do you pay a month?
so I think it's about £140, give or
Okay,
take.
not
So
bad.
yeah,
Yeah, considering the US, I mean, I just know generally if you purchase a health insurance policy, let's just say on average it's $500 a month. So,
wow, okay.
yeah, more expensive. But
Mm,
in the US, if you have a good job, if you work for the government or you work for a good corporation or company, they will essentially subsidize it for you, and they'll say,
okay.
okay, overall it's $500 a month, but we're going to pay $400 on your behalf. So you, as the employee, it only costs you $100. So
Okay.
yeah,
You want that?
yeah,
I think as well.
yeah,
Like, I mean, I don't know because I've never lived in the US, but my understanding is that if you can afford it, it's very good. The standard is
yeah.
high, but if you can't, you are struggling. Whereas at least in the UK, you get we have an overall good healthcare. But
Hmm.
I do know that we have our challenges too, and that shouldn't be ignored.
Yeah, I will say there's less of a safety net in the U.S. I mean,
Mm,
if you're in the unfortunate situation where you can't afford health insurance or
mm,
don't have health insurance and you're hospitalized, yeah, it can put you in financial trouble. I mean, depending on what happens, you may have medical bills to hundreds
mm.
of thousands of dollars, um, and there's
What
not
happens if
really a
you've
safety net.
absolutely
So
yeah? What if there's like absolutely no prospect of you ever being able to pay them? Like you haven't got a
uh,
job
they
or you
they write off the debt. The hospitals
right.
write off the debt. I mean, I know that it's just the reality of it, but they have situations with homeless people or people
Mm,
with addiction issues that will be
yeah.
hospitalized, right? Some, every month, every week, they're
Mm,
they're in there, and right, it's just not possible to uh, recoup those funds, so they'll write it off as bad debt. And then what happens essentially is then it falls to the private employers who are, it just, they kind of just tack it on to their fees. So someone's
mm,
paying for it at the end of the day.
mm.
But
Yeah, yeah.
if you absolutely can't pay, they likely will just write it off. Another thing too is if they charge you $100,000 and you say, oh, I don't have insurance, I can't pay. You can negotiate with the
Okay.
hospitals and facilities, and next thing you know, $100,000 bill will turn into a $25,000 bill, and they'll say, okay, we'll take 25,000 if you can provide that. So it's kind of a convoluted
Mm.
system, but yeah, it's just the reality of it over here.
Sure, very different.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe if we can r- keep talking about you as a firefighter a bit, and then I know you also work in the healthcare space as well.
Mm,
So maybe we can go into that next. But I just kind of want to
sure.
circle back. So if I'm understanding correctly, are you still paid £30,000 as a firefighter 15 years later, and you're hoping for an increase in pay coming up due to a change in government or who's in power?
Yeah, so we've just and it actually starts next month. We've just negotiated a 12% pay rise.
Okay.
So whatever that sort of, I think it works out. I mean, after everything and a few other bits and bobs, I think it works out as a firefighter will be on. I think it's roughly sort of 39,000 pounds. As of
And,
next month.
and
So
how do you
that's
feel about that? Do you feel it's sufficient? From my perspective, it doesn't seem like it is, considering the long time period with no increase in inflation and increased cost of living. But I'm just curious your
yeah.
perspective.
So I'm what's called a watch manager. So I think if I'm right, I think I'm like a captain in America. Like I'd be a
Okay.
captain in the
Okay.
fire service. So I'm not a firefighter anymore. I'm like an officer. So mine's a little higher. When it goes up
Okay.
by the 12%, I will be just shy of £50,000 as
Got
a
it.
captain or a watch manager. So I will be a little higher. So for me, um, you know, great in a way. I still think the salary is low for the sort of the skills and um, you know the service that we offer to the public. That's a personal perspective, and
Hmm.
I know one that's agreed on. Um, we're in a reality of a political situation here in the UK at the moment. We have a conservative government that haven't always been friends of the public sector, and we're seeing this now. We have like the COVID inquiries going on. And they're seeing how underfunding of health services led us to sort of struggle with the COVID pandemic, and our ambulance
Hmm.
services are very much struggling. Our mental health services are crippled, quite frankly. They're non-existent, really. Um,
Mm.
and that's through lack of sort of funding from central government. Now they put the argument back that we had to balance the books and all these sort of things. And well, I'm no economist, so I guess my argument on that is limited. I still think public servants are paid low comparatively in the UK for the skills and the sort of talent that they bring.
Yeah. Well,
But
I mean, on the
we are where we
surface, I
are.
think I would, yeah, tend to agree. I mean, I'm very surprised that it's not a higher amount, but it
Hmm.
sounds like your hands are a bit tied, right? I think you're at the mercy of what public policy dictates.
Yeah.
I mean, I would assume there's advocacy groups. Maybe you're a part of one, or that are what we would call lobbying the government in the U.S. or advocating on behalf of firefighters in the UK. Maybe you can speak to that. Is that the avenue that you try to advocate for increased benefits, increased pay?
Yeah, so we have a union. We have the fire brigades union, and they kind of advocate on our behalf, and they negotiate with our employers, and it's for our employers to negotiate, the money allocated from central government. So yeah, we do. It has some power, albeit ultimately limited. And then we have a political system in the UK where we can hopefully, vote out people and vote in people and
Mm-hmm.
see where that goes. But yeah, it is unfortunately a reality at the moment for people. But I think this latest rise will make some difference. Although I mean, current things. We're going through really high change in interest rates at the moment, so people's mortgages and
Mm-hmm.
rents and things are going really, really high. I mean, mine's nearly doubled in sort of 6 months. So,
Mm.
even though the salary is going to go up, it's actually only going to cover what I'm going to lose in the extra mortgage payments. So am I actually going to be any
So
wealthier?
help me understand that. So you're on a variable mortgage. Is that
Mm.
just something that you signed up for when you purchased the home way back in 13 years ago or whenever you bought it? Or do they offer fixed rate mortgages in the UK?
Yeah, absolutely they do.
Okay.
Yeah, so they do offer fixed rate, and they've been really low for a number of years
Mm-hmm.
now since crashes really. And what's happened is inflation is
Yeah.
high at the moment in the UK, and I'm not sure about the US, but it's really high at the moment in the UK for various reasons.
Yeah.
I know war in Ukraine. I know global food prices. COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and I also think for us in the UK, kind of Brexit's played a role in that too. That inflation is still really high. The Bank of England increases its rates, so I could have got a fixed mortgage. When we remortgaged this house, kind of 2 years ago, or sorry, no, like a year ago, but
Mm-hmm.
the fixed rate was more than I'm still paying, even though my
Mm.
variable rate has kind of caught it up. I'm just about to catch up with what it would have been if I'd fixed it. So whilst I could have fixed it, it was higher, a lot higher than it was. So we're taking the, I don't know, the kind of the risk, I suppose, that
Mm-hmm.
you know interest rates will rise. We know that, but it's taken us time to catch up. And then hopefully, as inflation comes down, that will go down again, and hopefully the rates will go down again. That's the sort of gamble
Yeah.
we're paying. We're sort of playing, but we'll see.
Okay.
See
Yeah.
where it's at.
Hopefully we're at the peak, right? I know the
Yeah.
Fed and the U.S. has indicated they're going to pause interest rate hikes. So
Mm,
hopefully it's the same in the UK. And if you're willing to share, I'm interested. What
mm.
is that mortgage payment? Just that monthly expense. I'd just like to compare to, what
Yeah.
I see in the US or what I pay in the US.
Yeah. So we paid £800 a month previously. That was when we were fixed. That was between two of us for 4-bedroom property. I think we are now at
Mm.
about £1,500.
Okay.
So yeah, it
Not
is.
not bad considering I
Mm,
just know in the US with where property prices are and where mortgage rates are now. I would imagine, I don't know how big your house is, but let's say you wanted to live where I live or in California in the US, I would
mm,
imagine for your home, you'd be looking at a $4,000 monthly
mm.
payment or
Rent or
$3,000
buying?
double.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buying. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I
So
appreciate you sharing that.
no, no dramas. No, it's not a secret. Like I'm pretty sure
Yeah.
most people are similar. It's like we're all doing it, aren't we?
Well,
Everyone's paying
well
summit. So
yeah. I will hope for you that interest rates stop rising. I think,
I,
we're all about ready for that to take place. So,
I think so.
um, okay. So I just have one more question, or I'm just curious as a firefighter in the UK.
Mm,
In the US, I picture firefighters, and at least where I live, we experience a lot of forest fires. So
mm,
big fires, obviously, firefighters are involved in that. I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in the UK there are not a lot of forest fires, just considering the climate, right?
mm.
Uh, is that fair, or are you fighting forest fires, or are you more involved in city firefighting, where it's home fires, you're responding to emergencies and things like that? I'm just kind of curious what a day in the life is like, or what your most common work is.
Yeah, no, we don't have the climate or the forests, quite frankly. Like you do over there
Mm-hmm.
in the states. I mean, we have moorland fires, so we have a lot of moorland on the outskirts of the city. So, large sort of vast areas of open moorland that we've had quite significant fires on, but nothing quite like I'll watch them in California, where you have these
Mm-hmm.
huge sort of forest fires over hundreds of acres and the planes drop in the water and all that jazz. We have
Yeah.
nothing like that. We just don't have the vastness, quite frankly, for that kind of fire. We don't have the climate or the sort of ecosystem really for that to take place. Where I'm based, so I'm based right in the city centre in a station called Moss Side.
Mm-hmm.
If you Moss Side's it's got its own little history within itself. It's a quite a famous area of Manchester. It used to be sort of very, very sort of run down, very rough. Uh, you know, really sort of poor area. It's slightly changing now. It still has lots of elements of that, but we sort of because of this explosion in the sort of the city, it's now kind of half very poor and half like mega high rise sort of kind of city.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, most of my work now is kind of high rise fires, building fires, car crashes, medical emergency stuff. Assisting the ambulance, water rescues. In canals and rivers around the city and lakes and things. So bit of a mix, really good mix, but yeah, so it's a good station to be at. It's busy.
Okay. And then I'm curious, is there, and I'll just be transparent, in my opinion, in the US, there's
Mm,
been over recent years, an increase in the homeless
mm,
population and homeless problems that I believe in the U.S., firefighters and police have to deal with, calls
Mm.
for people with drug issues, overdoses. Are you involved with that, or is that an issue in Manchester in the UK, or not as much?
No, it's certainly an issue in Manchester. We have drug problems, homeless problems. We have a really, from my perspective, I don't have any stats or figures on this, but we have quite a high suicide rate as well.
Hmm.
Now, one big difference between I think anyway, depending on your department, the fire service in England don't respond to medical emergencies. We're not sort of necessarily
Mm.
medically trained. We're sort of first aid trained, but not medically. We're not paramedics.
Okay.
So we're not responding, sort of giving medicine or, kind of doing those sort of things. That's for our ambulance service to do, and they're a separate service. But we can
Okay.
certainly
So.
assist. We do assist them quite a bit. So they might call on us for help, accessing a property or, carrying someone
Mhm.
out or things like that.
Okay, interesting. And then I'm curious how you deal with it. I'm sure you're exposed to some life or death situations, or maybe
Mhm.
what some would consider traumatic situations. How do you deal with that kind of stuff on a daily basis?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, those things happen. I mean, I would say maybe not a daily basis. They
Okay.
do come though. They do come. You know, fairly frequently. And I suppose part of it is that we're there objectively so often to do a job. I think that's part of it, and we're often very good at that, and we can focus on that. I think as well, just processing some of that stuff. Talking it through with your crew, working it through. Sometimes feeling a bit shit, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Acknowledging that. Well, that was really difficult, and I'm gonna feel it for a little bit, and that's okay, and that's fine, and it let it do what it's meant to do. Let your body do what it needs to do, and let it pass. Um, yeah, and then if it gets serious and sort of further down the trauma ladder, I suppose, then there's definite support mechanisms available if we need it.
Okay. No, yeah. I would imagine it'd be hard, but I would imagine you would become acclimated to the job and the situations and be able
Mm.
to handle what most people would not be able to handle at the beginning. So I think that's really interesting. And then to kind of maybe close out the firefighter path, because I know I want to get into what you do
Mm.
when you're not working as a firefighter as well. But do you foresee yourself finishing out your career as a firefighter in the UK? I would
Yeah,
assume
I do.
so, but I don't know if there's a pivot or um, anything you're thinking about in that regard.
No, I really do. I certainly plan on doing and hope on doing for various reasons. I absolutely love the job. I consider myself a firefighter. That's a big part of my identity, I suppose. And I don't see it as a job. I see it as kind of what I do. It's kind of part of me, really.
Hmm.
But I have every intention. I would like to go for more senior ranks one day and maybe lead the service, not just sort of move on from firefighting to sort of leading the service one day and become more like a
Okay.
like a chief or something, like a higher
Hmm.
ranking officer. That's how I would like to sort of finish my career and head that way. Who knows? But we'll see. But then, yeah, I mean, there's some really practical thing elements to it as well. My pension's in there. And my
Hmm. Hmm.
my kind of safety net is in there. I get paid every month. It's there's just some practical things that just I wouldn't leave for them. But there's more than that too. I absolutely love it, and it's my trade. It's what I do, and I like to think I'm really good at it as well. I'm not perfect, but I think I'm a pretty good firefighter, and like I suppose anyone who has a trade they're good at, it's why would you, unless you hated it, which I don't, then why would you leave it?
Hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's great, right? I think you've found something that you truly love and you love doing, and if that's the case, and
Mm.
the benefits and pay are there, why not keep doing it? So I think that's great. And then I
Yeah.
want to pivot too, because I think you mentioned that you work 4 days on as a firefighter and then 4 days
Mm.
off, which allows for other endeavors, free time. I mean,
Mm.
that sounds pretty awesome to me. So maybe you could speak to how you work as a mental health practitioner on those 4 days off. Um,
Yeah, so I run outside the fire. Like I run a little company called the Anxious Firefighter. The Anxious
mhm.
Firefighter mental health training and psychotherapy. So you're right. I work sort of privately in I suppose two sort of remits, but they're very much intertwined. So I suppose the main bulk of that work is I'm a therapist or a counselor or a psychotherapist, that whatever. I think you use therapist in the US. Is that the sort of
Hmm.
the common
Yeah,
term?
I think.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
I
so
think
I'm
that
a
would be the
therapist,
equivalent.
and yeah,
Hmm.
so I'm like a therapist, and I kind of do that, and have clients and see, sort of maybe 6, 7 clients a week, on my 4 days
Hmm.
off. Sort of, yeah, sort of I've seen a couple
Is-
today, and then I also do go into the corporate world and do kind of mental health training and awareness and train their
hmm.
managers on managing mental health conditions in the workplace or keeping people well and all those sorts of things. So I kind of twine it into two roles into one, I suppose.
Very nice. And what led you to this path? Was it? I think you recall that you said psychology was your major in university. Is
Mm.
that what led you to it? Just curious how you chose mental health. I think it's a really important thing. It's certainly top of
Sure.
mind in the U.S. I'd say across the
Yeah.
world right now. So, just curious.
Yeah. In a weird way, like I've always had an interest in how kind of the brain and the mind and human beings function, and I think that's why I did my degree
Hmm.
originally. But then I very much forgot about it for a number of years when I joined the fire service and sort of drifted into that. But well, I suppose in a nutshell, like when will it be? Sort of around 2013. A couple of different things happened. One, I lost a couple of close friends, both firefighters,
Mm.
to suicide, and
Mm.
they unfortunately took their own lives, and that kind of led me down to want to do something about that. But then, the business is called the Anxious Firefighter, and that's not random. I went through a period of sort of quite poor mental health myself. I really struggled
Hmm.
with kind of anxiety and these panic attacks and really low mood, and became sort of quite unwell, for a while. And that sort of, through a process of going to therapy, I kind of fell in love with therapy, um, and started becoming interested in it. And I read loads of books on it. I did a couple of courses at local colleges just to sort of, out of curiosity. And if any therapists are listening to this, they'll recognize this, the kind of the concept of the wounded healer. I think I originally wanted
Hmm.
to go and save people, as a therapist, because I'd been through my own mental strife. And
Hmm.
if anyone's thinking of a career in kind of therapy, um, you'll have to get used to the fact that you're not there to save people, and that might sound odd, but it took me a while to get my head around that. And I think I was applying the same principles as a firefighter to my work as a therapist, and that drove me through and drove me to kind of do the training and learn to be a therapist. But then when I started really getting into the work, and I went back to university to do a kind of post grad in psychotherapy, I learned very quickly that I'd have to let that go, and that's not what
Hmm.
therapists necessarily do. But it still fascinated me, and I still absolutely love it.
And,
So
and why do you say that you're not there to save people? Is it because
mm.
they truly have to help themselves and you're just there to help facilitate it and listen? Is that kind of it? I mean, that's kind of how I see it from my perspective or my life experiences, right? You
Yeah,
can't force anyone to do anything, right?
yeah. There's definitely elements of that, and whereas like a firefighter, you are there to save people. You're there to rescue people,
Hmm.
save their homes. Whereas a therapist really is about walking alongside someone, but they've still got to own it. I don't know whether you're like a Lord of the Rings fan. Do you know the film
Oh yeah, a bit.
at all?
Yeah, a bit.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So a therapist is like Sam, and your
Okay.
clients are like Frodo. You can walk with them. You can, maybe offer them some perspectives. You can hold a mirror up so they can see themselves and look at their behaviors. You can, potentially apply some theory, but ultimately they are always carrying that ring, and you ain't ever going to carry it for them.
Hmm.
And I mean, it's a really complex topic, but one thing you've got to be really careful of as a therapist is, one, not bringing your own perspective to someone else's world, but two,
Hmm.
not taking away their sort of personal power or autonomy and not becoming their de facto savior, because, like you say, they need to. The whole point, I suppose, is that people need to learn to function as best they can with the tools that they've got, independently, autonomously, and with their own power. And if you come along and take that away from them as someone who, like a therapist with power over them, then all you're really doing is removing their power and their autonomy. And your job is to offer them a different perspective of their own world so that they can make
Hmm.
changes to their own world. I
Okay.
know that's a ridiculously simplified sort of explanation of what we
Yeah.
try and do, but I hope it makes sort of sense.
No, I think it makes sense, and I think it's great what you're doing. I think what I'm getting is that your life is dedicated to service and serving others in different ways, and I think that's amazing. So maybe if you could tell someone one thing about what's the first step someone should take to improve their mental health, if someone's listening to this,
Hmm, it's a really good question.
or if they're
So,
struggling, right? They're depressed or anxious, and they're like, okay, I really
yeah,
need to start tackling this. What do they do? What's the first step?
yeah. So it's always going to be different for different people, but
Okay.
I suppose if I was to give one thing that people could maybe grab onto, there's often a big narrative in the mental health. I mean, and if I were use the word industry, mental health, I don't know what it's like in the US, but mental health in the UK has definitely become like an industry
Mm-hmm.
rather than a sort of caring
Mm-hmm.
profession. It's becoming who can sell the best product, who can
Mm-hmm.
create the newest app, who can come into your
Mm-hmm.
company and sell the best sort of product to you to do this. And I think the problem with that is it can often miss the narrative of what mental health really is. Mental health is a reflection of our external world being felt on the inside. I very, very, very rarely met a client who is just mentally unwell, but with nothing going on in their world.
Mm-hmm.
Mental ill health or poor mental health is not just in your head. It is very much in our environments. It's in the way
Mm-hmm.
we are living, or the way people are treating us, or the stress involved in our life, or bullying, harassment, abuse, all these sorts of finances, all these different things. So what can happen, or I found in the mental health kind of industry, is that there's this narrative that you've got to fight for your poor mental health, that you've got to battle through, that you've got to somehow fight anxiety or fight depression, whatever it might be, and battle it, and all these sort of narratives. And the first thing I often work on with my clients is going, okay, what if we stop fighting it, and what if we listen to what it's trying to tell you? And let that low mood or let that anxiety, instead of sort of trying to squash it down, or I mean, depression, depressing is what it really means. It's not really, it doesn't really mean low mood and sadness. It means the depressing of our emotional kind of being, rather than depressing or fighting. What if we stop and listen to it? What is that low mood trying to tell you? What is that anxiety trying to tell you? What is it that
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of that inner part of you is telling you is sort of wrong or not right for you, I suppose, in your world. And then maybe we can start looking at it slightly differently. What potentially could you change? What potentially could you look at? What is not serving you anymore? But yeah, that
Mm-hmm.
would be that would be where I would start. And it's going to be complex for different people, but yeah, I find there's this narrative about fighting poor, and even I'm using the words myself, like poor mental health. Well, someone who is anxious or depressed, that doesn't mean they're in poor mental health. Their body might be responding exactly how it's meant to the circumstances they're living in. Somebody who's
Mm-hmm.
working 14 hours a day just to pay the rent, can't afford food, has no social life because they're working all the time, is maybe getting bullying. If they felt low and anxious about that, I think that's a perfectly normal and reasonable response. So
Yeah.
does that kind of make sense? Like ask
No.
what your emotions are telling you, because they're very rarely wrong. um
Yeah, it
you know
100% makes sense, and
yeah.
I think from my experience as well, and I don't know if you are into mindfulness or meditation. I
Mm,
know that's kind of bigger and mainstream now, but I think one of the most important things you can do is to not, like you said, not depress things or push things away, but
mm,
just allow them space to be and observe what
yeah.
they're trying to tell you. Yeah, so I 100% get that. So I think that's great. I think that's a good message. Um, and I think in the interest of time, I think that's a good way to maybe close it out. But again, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with me. It sounds like you have a very interesting career. It sounds like you are very, what I got is you're very fulfilled serving others and helping others in different
Mm,
ways as a firefighter and a therapist. So, hey, I was very interested to learn about, get a little glimpse of your life. So again, thanks for taking the time. And I will say, if you'd like people to be able to reach you, I'm happy to link anything you have in the description of the episode, LinkedIn profile, websites, etc. So let me know and let people know how they could reach you.
Yeah, of course, man. We'll do. Just Google the anxious firefighter. I turn up pretty quick. So,
Okay, awesome. Well, yeah, you guys can connect with Jonny on LinkedIn, Jonny Ward, and Google the Anxious Firefighter to learn more. So thanks, Jonny, for taking the time.
you're welcome, Connor. It's been a pleasure.